Tonight on Primetime Politics, a cautious tone. The Prime Minister heads down to Washington to meet with the American president, but no word on what to expect, only a signal to lower expectations. What is motivating the government to do this? We will examine the issue. Also, two Ottawa strategists break down what's on the line with this PM trip. Can Mark Carney afford to come back home with no movement on trade or security? And David Coletto from Abacus Data tells us how Canadians are feeling about the Prime Minister's handling of the Canada-US relation. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Prime Minister is in Washington this evening, arriving just a couple of hours ago to prepare for another meeting with Donald Trump. Now, this will be the second time Mr. Carney sits down with the American president in the U.S. Capitol. But unlike the optimistic tone that followed the first meeting, government officials are sounding more cautious this time around, offering little in terms of expectations and only saying the meeting will focus on trade and security issues. Well, Chris Hall is the CBC's former national affairs editor. He joins us right now in studio. Chris, thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here, Michael.
So why is the government, striking this more cautious tone? What's behind that?
Well, I think in the past, Mark Carney was guilty of exceeding or setting high expectations and not meeting them. So I think this time around, they understand the difficulty of working with Donald Trump. They understand that he can be one thing in public when you're there sitting with him and another thing as soon as you leave the room. I think they're trying to set expectations a bit lower. So if something does come out of this, they can say, look, we did better than we might have thought. If nothing comes out of it, it's just another part of the process of being able to try to negotiate a new deal with around the sectoral tariffs of steel and aluminum. Then they have an opportunity to say, like, we didn't go in expecting that, but we made our case. And at face time, the risk reward is there. The risk is you don't get anything, but you set the expectations so low that that's probably a better situation. The reward is you get to deal with a guy who's going to make the decision in the final analysis, right? So dealing with Donald Trump directly, I think Mark Carney has calculated that this is an important meeting to have so you can continue to show that we are engaged and that he understands that Canada wants to make a deal. We just have to figure out what the parameters are.
But without a doubt, this meeting happens at a critical time for Canada, because when you look at investment, when you look at economic growth, when you look at employment numbers right now, Canada is up against the wall on a number of fronts here. Can you put this visit into some context for us?
Yeah, I think it's very important right now to understand that with the tariffs being what they are, that jobs are being lost in key sectors, particularly in Ontario. So politically, the imperative is here to do what Doug Ford says. Is it to show that we're strong and we're prepared to negotiate from a position of strength? Or is it with Daniel Smith from Alberta saying, we need to carve out some exceptions. Maybe we should get rid of that or lower the 10% on oil and gas imports into the United States. So I think it's really important right now, given the economic circumstances that we're seeing. The economy is slowing. As you pointed out, unemployment was 7.1% in August, likely to be at the same types of levels. I think he needs to show that I understand that I have promised to get this negotiation done. We've set two deadlines. We've missed them, but we are still prepared to work as hard as we can to get those tariffs at least reduced.
Okay, at least reduced. Talk to us, though, a bit about the change in strategy, because we have seen a couple of moves since that last visit, in the spring, Mr. Carney's first visit to Washington. Very positive, overtures after that meeting, but now since then we've seen the bringing back the counter tariffs, getting rid of the digital tax that both seen as irritants by the Trump administration. Talk to us about the change in strategy. Is that fair to say that's what's happening?
I don't know if it's an evolution as opposed to a change. Remember, in May, a lot has happened. That's a lifetime ago. A lot has happened since then. We had the digital services tax removed. We put in a lot of money, billions of dollars into defense spending. Both of them key demands of Donald Trump. So depending on your point of view, you're either trying to work and find common ground to get some kind of reciprocity, some move by Trump to ease tariffs, or you're caving. Whichever view you have, it's pretty well ingrained right now. So what's changed is we've done a lot to try and appease Trump. We've done a lot to try to meet him on some of his terms. And what we've gotten back as a country, Canada, is very little. We haven't had in fact, we've had worse. We had a 50% tariff now on steel and aluminum and copper. We've had new and increased levies on softwood lumber and furniture. So I think this is a comparative. He needs to show that I am in charge of these negotiations. I'm prepared to sit down with President Trump. I'm prepared to do what I did last time, which combine a little bit of flattery with the importance of this relationship. And the more you meet with Trump, the more you are able to make that case, and the more you give him what he wants, or at least gives him an opportunity to show that he's a strong leader too, that will work in your benefit.
You know, interestingly, I spoke to Louise Blais last week, a former UN ambassador for Canada, and she shared with us that based on the conversations she's had with Republicans in the United States, the Carney government is failing to make a personal connection with Trump, the kind of connection that's needed to bring about a deal. What do you take from that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting position, because clearly Donald Trump is a guy who wants to make deals. Wants to make deals where he's the winner, but he wants to make deals. As I said before, having a chance to sit down with him is a better opportunity than passing it by. As we understand, the invitation came from Donald Trump when the two of them met on the sidelines at the UN a week ago. And I think that's an important indicator, because people wanted to meet Mark Carney in New York, and Trump would notice that. And he understands that despite what his rhetoric is about we don't need anything from Canada, the truth is that the Americans do. The costs of those tariffs haven't been passed on to consumers yet. So the personal part of it I get now is that the FaceTime is good, but at the same time, I think the Trudeau policy in the past of trying to engage with senators, with congressmen, with governors, this is coming into a 2026, which is a midterm election year. As costs begin to get passed on to consumers of these imports on steel and aluminum autos, I think that they understand that there's a potential here to move some of the people that Trump needs to make sure he keeps control of Congress. At the same time, I think there's been this evolution. Carney is a player on Bay Street. He needs to get better known on Wall Street too. He needs to get better known on Pennsylvania Avenue. So the more often he can actually get down there, I think the better it is for Canada. Okay,
so politically then, what is at stake for Mark Carney? Because on the one hand, you've outlined a bit of the challenges he faces, but I also, in what you're saying, I can see how it might actually be a pitfall for him here at home, as it opens him up to criticism from the opposition.
He did promise that we have negotiations finished one time midsummer, then a time at the end of August. Both dates went by. Canadians are feeling the pressure. Prices are higher. We haven't seen a whack of new housing started despite the creation of this new agency. The Major Projects Office, these are 2 years or more down the road. He needs to start showing some results. And as I said, if you're dealing with Donald Trump, it's better to be doing it face to face. He values those personal connections. So, yeah, I think the pressure is on Mark Carney now. The polls show that people are becoming a little bit frustrated with the lack of progress on some of these key issues. He pitched himself as the one who was best able to deal with Trump, who had the knowledge and the background and the connections to get the economy working again. All of those things are off in the future still. And so I think he now has a crunch that he has to deliver more immediately than perhaps he might have thought when he was first elected back in the spring.
We're watching, and to the numbers, David Coletto from Abacus Data will join the program a little bit later. But Chris, thank you for starting the program with us this evening. Thank you for the time.
Okay, cheers.
Take care. Well, let's talk more about the importance of this visit. Stevie O'Brien is a Liberal strategist, also principal and founding partner at Barrack Hill Public Affairs, and also with us today, Conservative strategist Jordan Paquet, Vice President at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
So, Jordan, we're going to get you to start us out, because your party's been very clear when it comes, when it comes to this visit, and in fact, ahead of this visit, Pierre Poilievre did send a letter to the Prime Minister, essentially saying you've been a disappointment on the trade file. So that in mind, what then does the Prime Minister need to do in Washington today from a Conservative standpoint?
Well, the Prime Minister really set his own bar on a lot of this, starting before when he was sworn in and going into the election, that he said he's the expert, he knows how to get a deal, and then, coming off the campaign trail multiple times because he was talking about the trade war, and then all of a sudden this summer totally spun around and said, there's not a big rush to get a deal because we already have the best one. So I don't know what changed between then and now, beyond obviously politics and public sentiment on it, and interesting now he's going down and they're starting to lower expectations about what might actually happen. There's a lot of talk that seems to be happening, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of action, and I think that's what Canadians are really looking for out of this trip right now. What's actually going to come out of it? Yeah,
and without a doubt, the uncertainty that Canadians were feeling going into the election, many are still feeling now. So, Stevie, what do you think about this visit? What we're hearing from the Conservatives, that the Prime Minister has not handled this file as well as they think he should.
I mean, I couldn't imagine Poilievre saying anything else. This is the issue du jour. He has to take sort of the contrary position. He has to be pushing the government to do more. If the Liberals were in opposition, they would be doing exactly the same sort of messaging. So that doesn't surprise me. I'm cautiously optimistic about the trip down. There's been I think, one, Trump would love a distraction from his domestic U.S. shutdown and presenting himself as the deal maker, as some sort of thing. The strong man might be something positive that he'd like to have in American news cycles, which would be good for Canada. I'm hopeful that the Carney government has had some inclination of what this is going to be about, and that's the reason that they're going down with a sort of entourage of high-profile ministers. And within this time frame, they're hoping to get something out of it. It's probably not going to be a full final deal because we've got CUSMA coming up. But I think that they are hopeful, and it is based on expectations where they have been raised from the government. Is something they really need.
Yeah, so we'll see if actually anything comes out of it. Although it makes me wonder, though, because Jordan, you were talking about this change in tack almost that we've seen from the Carney government, from that visit back in May, and then the evolution over the summer to this now here in October.
Right.
But we've heard from the U.S. ambassador, for example, and we've heard Paquet just say he doesn't like the elbows up talk. He doesn't like what he interprets as an anti-Americanism right now in Canadian political parlance. Do you think Canadian officials need to change how they deal with this U.S. administration and drop a bit of the nationalism that in many ways has helped unite this country but seems to have rubbed the American ambassador and officials in D.C. the wrong way?
Well, to an extent, I think at least the governing party has seemed to drop some of that already. It used to be the whole elbows up approach, but now they've given concessions to the U.S. already without even actually asking. They've boosted defense spending, or promised to boost defense spending because the president asked for it. They got rid of the digital service tax. So all these things that they're just putting out on the table, but they're not getting anything in return. So yeah, I think when you're dealing with this administration, it is tougher, of course, because you're dealing with somebody like Donald Trump, who's more of a performance, and it's tough to kind of match that. So you do have to play into his ego a little bit and stroke his ego somewhat. I think we've seen the UK doing some of that and doing it quite well. So yeah, I think there does need to be some direct conversations happening. The Prime Minister has to make that point about how these deals and how interconnected our economies are, and that's why they need to come away with some type of win here, because they haven't to this date.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the elbows up strategy has to change, or that parlance dropped altogether?
I think the elbows up was primarily in response to the 51st state rhetoric, which has largely died down. I know it sort of popped up again last week, but I think that was Canadians feeling very national pride and concern that there might be a threat to sovereignty. So I think that's where that primarily came from. Secondly, the trade war started I think the whole world thought this might be a bit of posturing. This might be political talk, it might be showmanship, and that Trump was just kind of doing performative. But as time has gone on, you see that no, this is a real change in their strategy. They are pro-tariffs. The tariffs are not just a performance tool; they are a revenue generation tool. And so I think there is a recalibration. There's how are we going to operate? This isn't just for show. This is the new reality, and we're going to have a different tactic. And we're seeing a pivot there.
Recalibration, as you say, which actually brings me to Pierre Poilievre, because in the interview he gave, 2 weekends ago to Vashti Kapellos, whose name I can say because she's my friend. He basically said he would still be working towards a zero tariff trade agreement. But who really believes that is possible with this Trump administration so committed to tariffs?
Well, you have to work on it, and you have to make that case and convince, especially in some of the. Stephen Harper was really good about doing this and getting some of the softwood lumber tariffs dropped back in the Bush administration, also negotiating things with the Obama administration. Sometimes it's that quiet diplomacy that you do behind the scenes. When he went down, it was much thinner delegations that they would normally take, as opposed to Carney's probably taking the big plane Prime Minister Carney's taking the big plane with tons of journalists and tons of staffers and cabinet ministers. So I think it's part of that style is a little bit different too. But just because we don't think something Trump might go for something doesn't mean we can't try. And it was the Prime Minister himself that said he was the one during the election that could get the deal, and I think largely was elected on that case.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's almost a difference in strategy, right? Because on the one hand, you have Pierre Poilievre saying, I'm still going to push for a zero tariff deal, and now we're hearing from the government side, lowering expectations, saying we'll see what happens slowly, cautiously. What would you say to that, Stevie?
I still have a lot of faith in Mark Carney's ability to navigate this economic challenge. I think Jordan said something interesting about the behind-the-scenes work that Harper may have done in the softwood lumber. There's likely a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on between Canadian and American officials, between Carney and the White House, that we are not seeing play out. And we don't necessarily, until everything's done, know if the digital sales tax was a trade-off on something else. The negotiations are ongoing. It's frustrating sometimes on the outside that we aren't seeing, play-by-play, but it's probably better for Canada and the success of the negotiations that some of it can be done, in that quiet sort of negotiation between countries.
Okay, so I now have the Prime Minister in Washington. I will, by the way, be joining them. So what's a win here? What would you qualify as a win for the Prime Minister, a win for Canada with this visit to Washington? Jordan?
He needs to come with some type of commitment. If he can get some of these sectoral tariffs removed or at least lowered so that we can say that, we do have a special trading relationship, that the Prime Minister does have a good relationship with the President, it needs to be something like that. I'm not saying they're going to come out and say, okay, we have the whole Kuzma 2.0, here it is, renegotiated. That's a process that's going to take place over the next year. But just getting some of these sectoral tariffs dropped to at least to show, or getting some signal towards that, he needs something like that. If this is just another conversation, I mean, he could have did it by text, as apparently they text back and forth.
Okay, so some type of signal would be the very least that you're looking out of this trip to Washington. Stevie, what would qualify as a win for the Prime Minister and for Canadians with this visit?
I think I agree with Jordan that it's probably more than a signal. It's an actual movement on one of the tariffs, whether it's sectoral or the fentanyl border tariffs, which I think might be an easier one. They're just applied to Canada. There has been no real justification to use these, and they're being challenged in court. So it might be an easy place for Trump to demonstrate that he's forced Canada to fix the border and he's addressing fentanyl. There might be a good domestic message for him there, and it might be a good domestic win for Carney.
Mm-hmm. Jordan, if Carney is able to signal something like that, how bad is that for the Conservative Party, given this letter very public letter given by the Conservative leader today? I
don't think it's still going to have to result in our prices actually going to be coming down at our grocery stores. Is this actually going to, affect the day-to-day lives of Canadians? Look, I think Conservatives are hoping for a win. Everybody wants the economy to succeed, right? Like we don't want to see the country going bad just because politically it might be good for one party. So no, I think and Pierre Poilievre in his letter today had offered to reach out to U.S. administration officials and play that helpful part. So no, I think it's something that you do have that bit of approach that we have to get a win for the economy. So just because of who's in the Prime Minister's chair doesn't mean that we'll be somehow opposed to it.
Yeah. Any last words, Stevie?
I don't know exactly what Poilievre can offer in this sort of state-to-state negotiation, unless he's sort of saying, because we're ideologically similar, we might be able to get a better traction going in some of the conversations. I think that's a politically dangerous place to be in. I can't imagine that any of that will actually happen. But again, if we were in opposition, I would expect that the Liberal government would be saying, or the Liberal opposition party would be saying exactly the same thing. It's very difficult when a major issue is a foreign affairs issue, because opposition parties have less to do and less impact.
Yeah, and more so with this administration, because the negotiations where last time senators and Congress people seem to have influence on the administration, this time around it seems very much a top-down kind of exercise in Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, listen, Stevie, Jordan, thank you for this. I always appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, let's dig into some of the latest numbers here, because as I said earlier in this program, Mark Carney does arrive in Washington with his numbers softening here at home. And joining us right now is David Coletto, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, hello to you. I want to begin here by focusing in on Mark Carney, because when we talk about the challenges the Prime Minister has here at home, it might be worthwhile to start with his approval numbers. We have that on a board here. This is from the study you released yesterday. The favourable line, the green line, is still higher than the red, but that seems to be changing direction. What are you finding here?
Yeah, I think we're seeing over time a slow but steady decline in the number of Canadians who say they have a positive view of the Prime Minister, while the negative line goes up. And so that plus 14, which is still, I should say, very good, relatively speaking, is much smaller than it was soon after the federal election, where there was maybe a sense of real unity and somewhat euphoria after that election has dissipated. So there has been a noticeable decline in how people feel about the Prime Minister. But I will say again, it's not as if his numbers have fallen off a cliff. They're just this steady progression in the negative direction.
Now, you also say that Canadians respect Mark Carney, but they're still unsure of him. What's leading you to that conclusion?
Well, I think two things. One is, Mark Carney is a relatively new, political leader. It was only in January that most people started to hear about him. When we showed a picture of him in a survey when he announced he was going to run for a Liberal leader, only 9% of Canadians recognized him. So he has very quickly become recognizable. But I think during the election, many Canadians were projecting a lot onto him. They saw him as competent, as experienced, as being the right person for this moment. And now they're starting to assess whether those very quick judgments were true. And I think over time, many Canadians remain, in fact, most of those who voted for him remain of the view that he is, but there's still many who don't really know him that well. And I think that's still something the Prime Minister has to think about as he navigates both public opinion and all the policy challenges that he has.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the concerns Canadians are expressing, because when you look at top concerns, or as you put it in your study, the top issues facing Canadians, you say affordability is by far the #1 concern right now, and Donald Trump, which arguably is the issue that allowed Mark Carney to win a mandate, is now down to issue #5. What kind of challenge does that set up for the Prime Minister?
Well, I think, he was elected in large part because those who voted Liberal said, I need somebody to be in this position who can deal with Donald Trump. And that's still, for many Canadians, as you said, one of the top 3 issues. Close to 3 out of 10, or 1 out of 3 say that. But we've seen that issue salience around Trump has declined over the last number of months. And in its place, 1, growing concern about the economy, particularly around employment, and 2, the reemergence of broader affordability concerns becoming the focus for the vast majority of Canadians. And so the challenge for the Prime Minister is that, when you ask people later in this survey, who do you think's best, the Conservatives or the Liberals or other parties, to deal with these issues? The Conservatives always do better on affordability. They're doing better on the economy among people who care about it, whereas the Liberals still dominate on who people think could best handle Trump. And so if the Trump issue continues to recede, that means the government and the Prime Minister are going to have to find a way to connect with people on those issues around affordability. I think one of the reasons they're repeating, both in the House of Commons and outside it, of the tax cut that was passed earlier this year, is a reflection that they understand that affordability question remains one of their Achilles heels. And I think this data backs that up.
Well, as you say that, there is another issue as well that's inching up the board in your study. This is Canadians more and more being concerned with the issue of crime. To be fair, the government says it will introduce bail reforms, most likely at the end of this month. But looking at your report, concerns over crime may potentially, help lift Conservative support? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, now 1 in 5 Canadians put crime and public safety as one of their top 3 issues. It's the highest it's been since we've been tracking that. Another survey we released last week showed that, close to almost 45% of Canadians think crime in their community is getting worse. And that's higher in the GTA. It's higher in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, around Vancouver. And so, yeah, I think a number of high profile events, as well as I think the Conservatives putting additional pressure on this, is raising the salience of that issue. And to your point, Michael, when you ask people which party do you think is best able to handle it, the Conservatives are well ahead. And so this crime and public safety is very much, as we talk about, a shield issue for the government. They're going to have to respond to it, because if it continues to rise in salience, it's another one of those issues that Pierre Poilievre can use to question the government and probably, chip away at its approval rating, as it's done, I think, over the last number of months on other issues.
Okay, but I hear that, but I think it's, let's also bring in the fact that, again, looking at your numbers, Pierre Poilievre's approval rating remains stubbornly stuck. What's happening there?
Well, I mean, he's stuck, right? It's basically 40% of Canadians have a positive view and slightly higher number, 42% have a negative. There's two ways of looking at it. One is maybe he's hit his ceiling. There's people who, again, I think because he's been around much longer than Mark Carney on the political scene, people have a much better sense of Pierre Poilievre. You either like him or you don't. And if you don't like somebody, it's hard to change their mind. But the second side is, he's still not that unpopular. He's just up against right now someone across the aisle who's still way more popular than he is. And so I think for him, it's more of like, can I hold the support I've got? Can I keep that base united? And in hopes that we can chip away at how people feel about the prime minister, because I think it's going to be hard for Mr. Poilievre to improve his overall impressions. You just can't let them get worse, I think.
Okay, so taking all of that, what do you think Mark Carney needs to get done with this Washington visit? Because, crime aside, what happens with the U.S. will affect all the other issues Canadians are prioritizing in your survey: affordability, housing, and the economy. What does Mark Carney need to do here?
I think it's one word. It's reassurance, right? He's got to signal to the public that he has things under control, that he is focused on trying to get the best deal possible, and that even if we can't, even if the status quo is not going to be, in Kuzma and down the road, that he has a plan to protect people, right? And that's why those who voted for Mark Carney, I think, sent him into this job, is that he was a reassuring figure. He did, demonstrated competence and calmness, and those are the things people want to hear from him. And that's what I would say is job one: is come out of Washington with some sense of clarity for people, because the world is so uncertain. It's that level of uncertainty is through the roof, and that's making people deeply anxious about a whole bunch of things. Mark Carney's job as a leader in this country is to calm people down a little and say, we're going to get through this, and here's the plan to do it.
Okay, David Coletto, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael. Take care.
Well, before we leave you on this Monday, a couple of other stories to share with you as we look at what else happened in politics today. The federal government announced a change in schedule today. Instead of spring budgets, which has been the Canadian tradition, Ottawa will now table its federal budgets in the fall and put fiscal updates in the spring. A timetable followed in the UK. It's also part of a bigger shift in finance, with the Carney government establishing a new framework for accounting, one which separates the cost of operations from capital investments.
People will have more transparency and more clarity about how much we're spending in day-to-day operations of the government, salaries and other things, and at the same time see the shift that we need to do towards capital investments to build the future together.
Meanwhile, in France, the country's second highest ranking official resigned today, Sébastien Lecornu tendering his resignation as prime minister just one day after naming a cabinet. Appointed by the French President Emmanuel Macron, Lecornu says the government's minority standing in the National Assembly made it impossible to govern, leading the far right in France to demand new elections. Lecornu was France's fifth prime minister in less than 2 years. And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. I'm off to DC now. Andrew Thompson will be here tomorrow. Until then, take care.